The town of Mill Creek woke to the kind of morning that felt like any other in late autumn. A thin fog clung to the woods, rolling lazily across the fields, and the air smelled of wet leaves and wood smoke. The stream that ran along the edge of town was usually a place people forgot about. Teenagers fished there in the summer, kids skipped rocks in the spring, and every so often a hunter would cut through the thickets to reach the ridge beyond. It wasn't beautiful enough to draw visitors and not wild enough to stir fear. It was simply there, part of the scenery. Until that morning, when it became something else entirely. Harold Jenkins, a cattle farmer in his 50s, had woken before dawn as he always did. He pulled on his worn boots, grabbed his thermos of coffee, and set out with the intention of checking the water troughs on his property. The frost from the night before had coated the grass in a thin silver sheen, and his breath hung visible in the air. He carried a 5-gallon bucket in one hand and trudged down the path toward the stream that fed his land. The woods were quiet except for the occasional caw of a crow. He didn't notice, at least at first, how heavy that quiet felt. The stream was low that time of year, trickling over stones and leaves, the banks slick with mud. As Harold reached the edge, he saw something sticking out of the dirt near a bend in the bank, a pale shape that caught his eye immediately. His first thought was that it was deer bones. Hunters sometimes dumped carcasses out there when they didn't want the remains near their property. He walked closer, cursing under his breath about people's lack of decency. But the closer he got, the less it looked like a deer. The bones were too long, too upright. His boots sank into the mud as he knelt, brushing leaves and damp soil away with his calloused hands. His breath stopped. What stared back at him wasn't a deer. It was a ribcage. Human. Harold rocked backward, nearly falling into the mud. His eyes ran the length of the body, half buried, its arms twisted awkwardly against its sides. But there was something even worse, something that made his stomach turn. The skeleton ended at the neck. The head was gone. For a moment, he was paralyzed. His heart hammered so hard he felt it in his throat, and the air in his lungs seemed to freeze. He didn't know how long he stood there staring at the hollowed chest and broken spine, but when the bucket slipped from his hand and splashed into the water, the sound jolted him back. Without another thought, he turned and ran. He covered the half-mile back to his farmhouse in minutes, boots pounding the frozen ground. He burst through the back door, startling his wife, who dropped a skillet on the floor when she saw his face. Words tumbled out of him. Bones, a body, no head, and though she thought at first he was drunk or having some kind of fit, the sheer terror in his voice convinced her otherwise. Within 20 minutes, the sheriff's department had been called. By the time Harold returned to the stream with deputies in tow, half the town seemed to have gathered already. News traveled fast in Mill Creek, especially when it involved something strange. Pickup trucks lined the dirt road, and people stood in clumps, whispering nervously, craning their necks to catch a glimpse. Parents tried to keep children back, but the thrill of something forbidden kept them pressing closer. The deputies moved in quickly, shouting for everyone to stay back. Sheriff Dave Collins, a tall man with a weathered face and a reputation for keeping the peace, crouched near the remains while a deputy strung up yellow tape. His eyes were steady, but there was a tension in his jaw that didn't go unnoticed. The bones were real. There was no mistaking it. And the skull was gone. The crowd rippled with unease. Some muttered that it had to be a murder. Others whispered that animals could have dragged the head away, though few believed it. The way the neck ended looked too clean, too intentional. People spoke in hushed tones, trading theories like cards. Maybe it was a drifter, maybe someone dumped the body from the highway, maybe it was tied to something worse. Sheriff Collins stood and faced the crowd. His voice carried across the murmurs. Everyone needs to step back. This is an active crime scene. We'll investigate and release details when we know more. Until then, go home. But no one moved right away. Mill Creek wasn't used to crime. A couple of bar fights, The occasional break-in, sure. But a headless skeleton buried by their stream. That was something out of a nightmare. The sheriff called in the county coroner and state investigators. Soon, more vehicles arrived, unmarked sedans, SUVs with government plates. Men and women in jackets marked forensics began combing the area, placing evidence markers in the mud, snapping photographs, collecting soil samples. They spoke little, their professionalism only deepening the sense of dread. Harold stood with his wife at the edge of the tape, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He felt sick watching the scene unfold, knowing he had been the one to stumble across it. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ribs pushing through the dirt, the hollow where a head should have been. He wished he had never walked down there that morning. The investigation stretched into the afternoon. Rumors spread faster than the deputies could contain them. Someone said the bones belonged to a missing college student from the next county. Someone else insisted it was tied to a satanic cult, dredging up old urban legends from the 1980s. By the time the sun began to set, the story had already grown bigger than the truth could keep up with. That night, Mill Creek changed. People locked their doors earlier than usual. Children were kept inside. Neighbors called each other to share what they'd heard, each version worse than the last. The stream, once a harmless backdrop to their quiet lives, had become a place of dread. The sound of the water running over the rocks, a sound most had never noticed before, now carried a sharp edge, like a whisper in the dark. For Harold, sleep didn't come easy. Each time he drifted off, he dreamed of the skeleton clawing its way out of the mud, faceless and reaching. He knew he would never walk to that stream the same way again. And deep down, though he would never say it out loud, he feared this was only the beginning. The stream had given up a secret, but it hadn't yet told its story. The stream bank was quiet the next morning, but the town wasn't. Overnight, the discovery of the headless skeleton had transformed Mill Creek from a sleepy community into a place buzzing with suspicion and unease. Coffee shops were crowded with whispers, church steps became rumor mills, and every phone line seemed to hum with the same conversation. By sunrise, Sheriff Collins was already back at the site with a team of state investigators. They worked in silence, setting up floodlights over the damp ground, scanning every inch of the bank. What they uncovered only deepened the mystery. Beneath the skeleton, they found remnants of clothing, rotted fabric clinging to the bones. What was left suggested jeans and a flannel shirt, the kind nearly anyone in Mill Creek might wear. A rusted belt buckle was pulled from the mud. No wallet, no shoes, and most importantly, no skull. The coroner, Dr. Melanie Porter, crouched beside the remains with gloved hands and a steady gaze. She spoke quietly to the sheriff, her words clipped but clear. The body's been here at least several months. Possibly longer. The soil around the bones suggests it was intentionally buried shallow, then eroded back up by the stream. The cut at the neck isn't animal work. It's clean. Deliberate. Sheriff Collins rubbed the back of his neck. So we're looking at a homicide. Porter didn't answer right away, but her eyes said enough. Word of that conversation leaked within hours. By the time Collins returned to his office, the town was buzzing with certainty. This wasn't an accident. It was murder. The sheriff knew what was coming. He'd seen it before in other towns when tragedy struck. Fear turning inward, suspicion creeping into conversations, neighbors eyeing each other differently. In Mill Creek, where everyone knew everyone, it was like a spark in dry grass. At the diner on Main Street, patrons leaned over half-eaten plates to whisper. Could be a drifter, sure, one man said, stabbing his eggs with a fork. But don't you find it strange it happened right here? Somebody local knows something. Across the counter, the waitress shook her head. I heard it was ritual stuff. Back in the 80s, there were rumors, you remember? Kids in the woods doing satanic things. What if it's come back? The man frowned. Or what if it never left? By afternoon, the FBI had been called in. 2 black SUVs rolled into town, drawing stares as they passed. Agents in plain suits stepped out and introduced themselves at the sheriff's office, their presence confirming to everyone that this was more than just a local matter. Collins bristled at the intrusion but didn't protest. Mill Creek had never seen anything like this. The investigation widened. Deputies canvassed the town, knocking on doors, asking if anyone remembered strangers passing through in the last year. Hunters were questioned, hikers too. Old missing persons cases from neighboring counties were dug out of storage and spread across the sheriff's desk. Photos of young men and women stared back from faded posters, their smiles frozen, their fates unknown. Any one of them, Collins knew, could match the body in the stream. But it wasn't just outsiders the townspeople suspected. Theories multiplied, each one darker than the last. Some claimed the head had been taken as a trophy. Others whispered it was part of a ritual, the work of someone in their own midst. A few named names outright: quiet loners, men who drank too much, families who kept to themselves on the edge of town. None of it had proof, but proof hardly mattered anymore. The story had taken root. At night, the stream became a place of fear. No one went near it. The yellow police tape fluttered in the cold wind like a warning. Teenagers who once snuck down there for beers now avoided it entirely. Parents kept their children close. Dogs barked more often in the dark, their ears pricked toward the woods. Harold Jenkins, the man who found the body, could hardly leave his house without being stopped. Some treated him like a hero for discovering the truth. Others eyed him warily, as though finding the skeleton made him part of it somehow. He didn't sleep much. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the bones, the empty neck, the mud clinging like flesh. He had stopped going down to his cattle alone. Even his wife noticed how he lingered near the porch light longer than before, reluctant to step into the shadows. Meanwhile, Dr. Porter continued her work in the coroner's office. Day after day, she examined the bones, searching for clues. The skeleton told a story, though not a full one. The victim was male, likely in his 30s, around 6 feet tall. No obvious signs of healed fractures, no dental records yet matched. She measured the cut at the neck again and again. Clean. Precise. Not the work of animals, not the work of time. Someone had removed that head with purpose. The FBI pressed the sheriff for more resources. They brought in ground-penetrating radar to scan the banks, fearing there might be more graves nearby. Nothing turned up at first, but the fear only grew. If there was one body, people reasoned, why couldn't there be more? The local paper, the Mill Creek Gazette, ran its biggest headline in decades. Headless body found near stream, FBI investigating. Copies sold out within hours. Reporters from outside towns began showing up, parking their vans along Main Street, cameras pointed at the courthouse steps. The sudden media glare made townsfolk uneasy. Mill Creek wasn't used to outsiders, let alone national attention. Sheriff Collins held a press conference on the courthouse lawn. He spoke carefully, saying only what he could confirm: that human remains had been found, that the investigation was ongoing, that the public was not in immediate danger. But the questions shouted at him from reporters carried the weight of something larger. Why was the head missing? Did they suspect foul play? Was there a serial killer in Mill Creek? Collins avoided the words, but he saw the fear in the townspeople's faces. That night, rumors turned to paranoia. Someone claimed to hear chanting in the woods. Someone else swore they saw lights moving near the stream. Calls poured into the sheriff's office, most of them baseless, but Collins couldn't dismiss them outright. He sent deputies to patrol the area, though they found nothing more than deer tracks and the rustle of wind in the trees. Still, fear has a way of feeding itself. Each creak of a floorboard, each snap of a twig outside, felt like evidence. People who once left their doors unlocked now bolted them tight. Neighbors checked on each other less, suspicion carving small cracks into trust. Mill Creek had become a town waiting for answers, yet terrified of what those answers might be. And in the middle of it all was the stream, silent and cold, carrying the weight of secrets. The water slid past the bank as it always had, indifferent to the fear it now inspired. But for the people of Mill Creek, it had become a wound, and everyone knew wounds had a way of festering if left unanswered. What haunted Sheriff Collins most wasn't what they knew but what they didn't. A body without a head wasn't just a corpse, it was a message. Whether from a killer, a ritual, or something else entirely, someone had wanted that head gone. Someone had wanted the town to be left with questions, and questions were sometimes more dangerous than answers. As the second week of the investigation began, Collins sat alone in his office, staring at the photographs spread across his desk. The ribcage, the spine, the dirt-stained flannel shirt. He rubbed his eyes, weary but alert. Somewhere out there was a skull. Somewhere out there was the missing piece of the story. And until they found it, Mill Creek would never sleep soundly again. The third week after the discovery began with a cold snap. Frost glazed the fields around Mill Creek, the trees stripped bare, their branches clawing at a steel-grey sky. It should have been the season of quiet routines, families stacking firewood, kids crunching through piles of leaves on their way to school, shop windows decorated for Thanksgiving. Instead, the town carried a tension that never loosened. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the stream, the skeleton, the missing head. By then, the FBI had turned part of the sheriff's office into their own command center. Maps of the area were pinned to the walls, covered with red dots marking search sites. Case files from half a dozen counties lay stacked in neat piles, each one representing a missing person who might match the remains. Agents spoke in clipped tones, their faces unreadable, their presence a constant reminder that whatever had happened wasn't simple. Sheriff Collins felt it most at night. When the reporters had packed up for the day, when the hum of conversation at the diner gave way to silence, the weight of the unanswered questions pressed hardest. He'd worked Mill Creek for 20 years. He knew the people here, their habits, their tempers, their secrets. And yet he couldn't shake the thought that the answer wasn't outside town but right under his nose. The coroner, Dr. Porter, had finished her initial report. She stood in Collins's office one evening, her glasses fogged from the chill outside, the file clutched tight in her hand. "Male, 30 to 40, she said, her voice steady but low. No signs of healed injuries, no surgical implants. Cause of death is decapitation. That's not speculation. That's fact." Collins shifted uneasily in his chair. "Anything else?" Porter hesitated, then laid out several photographs. The vertebrae at the neck were sheared clean. No ragged tearing, no gnaw marks. "This wasn't done in panic or haste," she said. "It was deliberate. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." The words sat heavy in the air. Collins nodded, but inside he felt the ground tilt further. It wasn't just murder. It was precise, calculated, almost practiced. That same night, a call came in from a man named Bill Mathis, who lived on the outskirts of town. He claimed his dog had dug up something in the woods near his property. Deputies rushed out with flashlights, and within an hour they had cordoned off another patch of earth. Buried just 2 feet below the surface was a fragment of bone, small, curved, unmistakably part of a human skull. The news hit Mill Creek like a lightning strike. By morning, everyone knew. The headless body by the stream finally had its missing piece, or at least part of it. Rumors swirled. Some said the skull had been buried in pieces as part of a ritual, others that it had been scattered to keep investigators guessing. Reporters flooded back into town, their cameras fixed on the dirt road near Mathis's property. The sheriff's office confirmed only the basics. Human remains had been found, believed to be linked to the body at the stream. No other details were released. But the secrecy only fueled speculation. People began locking their doors in daylight, watching the woods with suspicion. Parents walked their children to school instead of letting them ride their bikes. What little sense of safety Mill Creek had left was gone. For Harold Jenkins, the discovery of the skull fragment didn't bring relief. It brought nightmares. He couldn't stop imagining the rest of the skull, the face that might once have looked out from those hollow sockets. He told his wife he wished he had never found the body, that some things were better left buried. She told him to pray. He told her prayers didn't bring back peace. The FBI leaned harder into their investigation. They scoured missing persons databases, cross-checking dental records. Though the fragment wasn't enough to confirm identity. They interviewed families from neighboring towns, asking about relatives who had disappeared. Each conversation ended with more pain, more faces who might never have closure. Inside Mill Creek, suspicion began to turn inward. At the bar, whispers carried over the clink of glasses. People spoke of neighbors they didn't trust, of strange noises at night, of men who went hunting alone too often. Theories about cults resurfaced. Old crimes were dragged back into the light, unresolved assaults, missing pets, even rumors of trespassers in the woods decades ago. Each story, no matter how flimsy, added to the sense that something had always been lurking just beneath the town's quiet surface. Sheriff Collins tried to calm the storm, but he felt it too. He thought of faces he'd known since childhood, people he'd arrested once or twice for bar fights or petty theft. Could one of them be capable of something like this? He wanted to say no, but the clean cut at the neck haunted him. That wasn't rage. That wasn't an accident. That was someone who knew exactly what they wanted. The breaking point came one evening when a group of teenagers, daring each other, snuck past the tape at the stream. They carried a phone, recording themselves laughing, swearing, trying to act unafraid. But their laughter died quickly. In the footage, shaky but clear, one of them pointed to a tree near the bank. Carved deep into the bark was a symbol none of them recognized, a rough circle with a cross slashed through it. The video spread across town before deputies could shut it down. Theories exploded. Some swore it was a cult symbol. Others claimed it was nothing more than graffiti. But the timing was too sharp, too deliberate, to dismiss. The FBI sealed off the stream completely, posting agents around the clock. Mill Creek was no longer just a town with a mystery. It was a town under siege, its people held hostage by fear and the unknown. That night, as Collins drove home through the quiet streets, he noticed curtains twitching in every house. Eyes watching. People weren't just scared anymore. They were waiting. Waiting for the next discovery, the next secret to claw its way out of the mud. In his gut, the sheriff knew the case wasn't close to over. The skull fragment was only the beginning. Whoever had placed that body in the stream hadn't wanted it found. And now that it had been, Mill Creek wasn't just holding its breath. It was unraveling. Snow came early that year. By the start of December, Mill Creek lay under a thin white blanket, muffling the town in a quiet that felt less like peace and more like suspense. The stream, where the headless skeleton had been found, ran dark and sluggish beneath a crust of ice. The yellow tape strung between the trees sagged under the weight of frost, and the floodlights set up by investigators glared against the snow like watchful eyes. What should have been the season of decorations and family dinners had instead become weeks of curfews, rumors, and sleepless nights. The skull fragment unearthed on Bill Mathis's property had left the FBI with more questions than answers. Tests confirmed it belonged to the same victim, but identification remained elusive. Dental records didn't match, and no family had come forward with a missing relative fitting the description. For the townspeople, that was almost worse. A nameless body meant there was no story to contain the horror. It was just a shadow, faceless, belonging to no one and everyone at once. Sheriff Collins sat in his office late one night, staring at the map of Mill Creek tacked above his desk. Red pins marked the stream, Mathis's land, and every place searched since. He traced the lines between them with his finger, thinking about roads, hunting trails, forgotten clearings. Whoever had left that body knew the area well. This wasn't random. It was chosen. The FBI pressed him to dig deeper into local records, old cases, old arrests, even property disputes. Collins bristled at the implication but complied. He pulled dusty files from the archives, flipping through the lives of men and women who had stumbled into trouble over the decades. Most were petty thefts, bar fights, DUIs. But some files carried darker stains. A man accused of cruelty to animals, another of domestic violence, both never fully proven. Collins stared at their photographs, wondering if the line between an angry drunk and a killer was thinner than anyone admitted. Meanwhile, the town frayed further. A family on the east side claimed their shed had been broken into, though nothing was stolen. Others reported hearing footsteps outside at night, or seeing figures moving near the tree line. Deputies investigated each call, finding little more than raccoon tracks and wind-shaken branches, but fear didn't need proof to grow. By now, people believed Mill Creek had a predator in its midst. The turning point came in mid-December, when another discovery was made. A hunter, trudging through the snow on the ridge above the stream, found a shallow pit beneath a fallen tree. Inside were bones. Not human this time, but animal, deer skulls, their antlers snapped off, arranged in a rough circle. At the center of the pit lay a bundle of cloth, rotted and damp. When investigators pulled it apart, they found stains that still lingered, dark and unmistakable even after months in the ground. The photographs never made it to the papers, but word spread anyway. "It's ritual," people whispered. "It has to be." Theories hardened into conviction. To many in Mill Creek, the headless body was no longer the work of a lone killer but part of something larger, darker, older than they wanted to believe. Sheriff Collins wasn't convinced. He stood at the pit in the snow, staring at the circle of bones, his breath fogging in the cold air. To him it looked staged, almost theatrical. Someone wanted them to see this. Someone wanted them to believe it was ritual. He said as much to the FBI agent beside him, but the agent only frowned. "Whether it's ritual or staging, Sheriff," he said, "the intent is the same. Fear. Control." Back in town, that fear curdled into anger. Neighbors accused neighbors. A local man with a reputation for wandering the woods at night was beaten outside a bar after someone claimed he was part of it. Families who had lived in Mill Creek for generations found themselves suddenly outsiders, judged by rumors of old feuds or eccentric habits. The skeleton had not only unsettled the town, it had turned it against itself. Collins worked tirelessly, but even he felt the strain. Nights blurred into days. He found himself staring at the photographs of the skeleton until the hollow chest seemed to stare back. He thought often of Harold Jenkins, the farmer who had first stumbled onto the bones. Jenkins had stopped answering calls, his wife saying he was too shaken, too tired of reliving the discovery. Collins worried about him but understood. Some burdens didn't fade. They settled in and grew heavier with time. The break finally came not through science or evidence, but through something small. A deputy reviewing old case files noticed a missing persons report from 2 counties over. A man in his mid-30s, last seen nearly a year before, driving through the backroads near Mill Creek. He had never been found. The description matched the skeleton's build, and though dental records were inconclusive, a scar noted in his medical history lined up with a mark on one of the bones. The man's name was Eric Lawson. A drifter, some said. A troublemaker, others claimed. Arrested twice for theft, once for assault. He had no family close by, no roots in any one place. His life had slipped easily into silence. For some in Mill Creek, that was almost a relief. The victim wasn't one of their own. But for others, it made the fear worse. If Lawson had been passing through, then someone local had chosen him, killed him, buried him. The predator wasn't outside, it was here, watching, waiting. The FBI pressed harder now, convinced Lawson's death was part of a pattern. They combed through cold cases, looking for other bodies, other disappearances. They searched the woods with dogs and drones, but the snow had covered what secrets the earth might have held. On Christmas Eve, Sheriff Collins drove alone past the stream. The snow was deep, muffling the world into silence. He parked his truck, stepped out, and stood at the bank where it had all begun. The stream gurgled faintly beneath the ice, indifferent as ever. He thought about Lawson, about the missing skull, about the circle of deer bones arranged like a warning. He thought about his town, splintered by suspicion, its innocence stripped away. The case remained open, unsolved, unfinished. The FBI would stay on it for months, perhaps years. But Collins knew, even if answers came, the damage was already done. Mill Creek had changed. Its people had seen something they couldn't unsee, felt a fear that wouldn't wash away. As he turned back toward his truck, Collins looked once more at the stream. Somewhere out there, he thought, was a person who had buried Lawson. Someone who had walked these same banks, who knew the land as well as he did. Maybe they were still here. Maybe they were watching now. The thought settled in his chest like a stone. Back in town, lights glowed in windows, families gathered around tables, children unwrapped gifts. Life went on, as it always did. But beneath the snow, in the mud and roots and cold earth of Mill Creek, a secret remained. A secret that had clawed its way into the open once, and might again. And though the stream ran quiet, it carried with it the memory of bones, of silence broken, of fear that lingered like a shadow too long to outrun.